Hello, Grimaulkins here for the Topic of the Week video, and this week I'll be discussing why I don't like the idea of the Gray Jedi. This week's topic was submitted by Tumblr user grimaulkins, and her topic is why the concept of Gray Jedi makes no sense in the Star Wars universe. Okay, now, what is a Gray Jedi? Good question, because a lot of people seem to have different ideas on this. I mean, I was looking this up and a lot of people talking about Gray Jedis, and some of it was a little weird. Like, some of it was basically being a Jedi, but not really being a Jedi. You don't have to follow the code or anything, and you get to use all the dark side powers, but without any consequences. Basically, Mary Sue OCs. Alright, let's take that and throw it out. That's not even really worth discussing, because we can call those Mary Sues, and I think we're pretty much done there. Because you can't just do everything, having all these cool force powers, being on the light and the dark side, and not having to do anything, and not having to follow any rules, and you get to do whatever you want, no consequences. Okay, let's just stop. One of the most prominent concepts that I saw with the Gray Jedi and what they are is that they are balanced in the Force, in that they balance the light and the dark side. You know, they're half and half. They're half light, half dark, and all these other types of descriptions that I've seen. And, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make sense, and it's not even supported by the movies. And I know people will point to the books and video games and look at the EU. We're not looking at the EU. Sorry. You know, the EU, the old EU and the new EU are both complete messes with all sorts of different ideas, all sorts of fanfiction BS, stuff that doesn't make sense, stuff that's stupid. That's not that they don't ever have anything good. I do love characters like Mara Jade and Admiral Thrawn, and there are other little things that are neat, some stories that are cool. But as a whole, the EU is kind of a mess. So when people want to say, well, look at the EU. All right, well, you know, you'll see a lot of the EU. Some stuff in the EU frustrated other EU writers. And you also had people like Karen Travis just mucking things up because she wanted to do what she wanted. She's looking at her Mandalorians. But, so let's just take, looking at things from, like, the movies and, let's see what, the main source of canon and how this, the concept of the Gray Jedi applies. Now, the concept of the Gray Jedi as an idea, like this idea of being balanced in the Force, isn't bad. And the idea of being a Force user that's not a Jedi or a Sith is also fine. We've seen this stuff before. That's not new. I mean, a lot of people like to act like this is some sort of like revolutionary idea. It's so distinct. No, not really. The Jedi were a very specific sect of light side users. And I'll talk a little bit about the Jedi in a minute, and some people's misinterpretations of things. But one of the best examples, especially something recently I'd like to pull out, is that Chirrut from Rogue One is probably one of the best examples of a light side Force user that's not a Jedi. Well, while he does a lot of, Jedi things and stuff, he's not officially a Jedi. He doesn't use a lightsaber. He doesn't have that same training, but he obviously has the Force. Now, if people want to talk about, identifying different factions within the Force, you have the Jedi, you have the Sith, and then you have these other different groups that use the Force but don't align with, either main group, the Jedi and the Sith. That's fine. We've seen this sort of stuff before, and if people want to talk about identifying certain philosophies that don't line up specifically with the Jedi and the Sith, I'm fine with that. The Gray Jedi thing doesn't really make sense. Especially if you don't want to be identifying as a Jedi, you don't want to follow the Jedi code, you can't really call yourself a Jedi. Really? I mean, to be perfectly honest. And I see some people who, talk about the idea of the Gray Jedi, about how, oh, well, the Jedi code was stupid, so I don't want to follow that. I don't like it. Here's the thing. The Jedi code did have flaws. Yeah. That's not, controversial. That's what's established in the movies, not even in just the prequel era, but also in the original trilogy. You have, Yoda and Obi-Wan who, represent the old guard. They are the ones who train Luke. They are Jedi, and they want to push Luke into a, fitting the mold of the old Jedi code. I mean, Yoda didn't even want to train Luke at first because he was too old. But it's like, okay, congratulations. He's the only person here who has even the remote chance of being trained to fight Vader and Palpatine. Who cares if you're following some rules of at this point, long extinct Jedi Order? Yeah, the old Jedi Code had faults. That doesn't make the Jedi evil, like some people want to say. It's not like, oh, the Jedi are all awful. They're all just a bunch of stupid, dogmatic, celibate monks. And, well, yeah. It's one of the things about the prequel trilogy that some people didn't quite seem to get, or they take and they misrepresent, is that the Jedi were flawed. The Jedi had bad ideas. Now, some ideas had good intentions, like the concept of avoiding, attachments and trying to be more separate and more controlled in yourself. That's not a bad idea if you're trying to avoid falling into the passion of the dark side. That makes sense, of wanting to avoid the things that could cause temptation towards the dark side. In terms of intention, that's totally logical. However, you also have someone like Anakin who can't fit that mold, who couldn't possibly fit that mold. Well, you square peg round hole, and Anakin does end up having emotional issues because of stuff like that. And it works for some people, but even Obi-Wan fell in love with Satine. Obi-Wan, one of the most Jedi to Jedi, still fell in love and had that attachment. Like, even people who are part of the Jedi Code don't follow every single letter of the Jedi Code all the time. And this is one of the things, is that the Jedi Code had faults. The old Jedi Code had faults. This is one of the things that I really, really was expecting to see Luke do. Like when you get to the end of Return of the Jedi, or just in Return of the Jedi, when Yoda tells Luke to pass on what he's learned, it's like, yeah, we all expected Luke to create his own Jedi Order with his own Jedi Code, but he wouldn't just be following all the things, because what makes someone a Jedi doesn't need to follow the exact old code. You don't need to be celibate. You don't need to avoid attachments, because Luke proved that you can be a Jedi and have those attachments. I mean, in Empire Strikes Back, Yoda and Obi-Wan wanted Luke to stay and train. He had to stay and train even when he knew his friends were in danger. Because if he went there and tried to fight Vader immediately, he'd get his butt handed to him. And he got his butt handed to him. He walked right into a trap. But he wanted to save his friends. He couldn't let them die. Now, had Luke made that sacrifice, had he let Han, Luke, Leia, Chewie, R2, C-3PO, if he had let all of them possibly die, I mean, he didn't know what might happen. I mean, Vader may have kept them around to keep using them as bait, or if Luke didn't show up, he'd be like, alright, I'm done, just killed all of them. You never really know what exactly is going to happen. But if he had made that sacrifice and let everyone die, but he gained that power, could he have beaten Vader? It's a possibility, but we never really know. But Luke wasn't going to take that chance. He wasn't going to stand by and just keep doing the training like nothing had happened when he knew that his friends were in danger. His attachments were important. He was very emotional in that. And he was making the moral decision, not the pragmatic decision, not the one that would get him the most power, but the one that he felt was morally right. And this is one of the things that makes Luke such a great character. And you see this even through Return of the Jedi, where he desperately wants to redeem his father, turn Darth freaking Vader to the light side. And Luke, in a lot of ways, represents a lot of the pure goodness, and proved that you don't have to follow all these old rules to be a Jedi. And this is what's so great about Luke, is he broke those norms. He broke what was expected of a Jedi and still became a great Jedi. He still beat Darth Vader, and he still ended up with, turning Darth Vader to the light side. And he didn't follow the old Jedi code. And this is when Yoda tells him to teach what he has, pass on what he has learned. It's not just about his force powers. It's not just about his lightsaber skills. You also have a lot of things that Luke very specifically can pass on, such as his knowledge of how to deal with the dark side. The old Jedi code resisted the dark side by avoiding anything that couldn't possibly lead to it. Unfortunately, this left them essentially vulnerable to what happened, like with the manipulations of Palpatine, who, instead of just turning people evil, he tricked the Jedi into fighting a war. A war that Jedi were generals in a war. And this is brought up as, should we really be doing this? Kind of a thing. And no, they really shouldn't have if they wanted to be, just peacekeepers. But they did it because they wanted to fight and help and protect people. But it was all part of machinations from Palpatine. But Luke, even the old Jedi Order fell prey to this, and you saw people like Anakin who didn't have the proper training to deal with his feelings, because Obi-Wan and even Yoda, they offered advice, but it's not really what Anakin needed. Anakin needed something more specifically tailored to him because he didn't grow up in the temple as a traditional Jedi. But the Jedi weren't flexible enough for this. Luke would be. And moving forward, he knows what it's like to feel the temptation of the dark side. He knows what it's like to deal with that. So he can teach, in his Jedi Order about the dark side and say, I have felt it. I know what the temptation of the dark side is like. I know what it's like to feel the dark side. And this is how you deal with it, instead of cutting yourself off and becoming a monk just to avoid it. And this is why you see in things like some parts of the EU, like him marrying Mara Jade and having a son. Like, the old Jedi Order wouldn't have allowed that. But this is nice to see Luke being a Jedi without having to follow all the specific rules. So when people try to say, oh, the rules of the old Jedi Order, I don't like that, so I'm a Gray Jedi. I just feel like a lot of times it's a little bit missing the point, because you can still be a Jedi without specifically following all of those things. Another thing that this misses is, even if you avoid just all the cool dark side powers and you're just talking about using the dark side, that contradicts what we see even in the movies, even in the original trilogy, without even talking about the prequels. When you use the dark side, it's a corrupting force. As Yoda says, you can get power quickly from the dark side. But as you can see with the dark side users of Palpatine and Vader, that dark side comes with a cost. You lose who you are. And if you look at Anakin in the prequels, and even in the Clone Wars show, you see Anakin before he officially turned to the dark side and pledged himself to Sidious. And you saw that despite the fact that he had issues, he was still, a decent guy. But after that, he fell. He started committing slaughter, murder, genocide. Even when he met with Padme again, it was to try to convince her to join him in his empire. Proclaiming that the Jedi were evil. Yes, the dark side is powerful. The dark side can get you that power quickly, but it corrupts you. It's evil. I believe George Lucas said this when he was discussing things with the Clone Wars writers, that the dark side is the imbalance. The light side is good, the dark side is evil. You don't want the evil. The balance isn't equal numbers of good and bad guys. The Sith caused the imbalance. The Sith caused all the horrible things. The Sidious caused all the horrible things in the prequels. The invasion of Naboo, the Clone Wars, the rise of the Empire. All of this was Darth Sidious and the dark side. That's a whole bunch of nasty stuff. And one of the things you can actually see a lot of this come to play in Return of the Jedi during the big battle between Luke and Vader and Palpatine, where Luke, during that movie, is trying to convince Vader, especially at that end when he lets himself be captured, he tries to convince Vader to come to the light side. He wants to redeem his father. He believes in it. He senses that deep down, even though he is a corrupted evil man, deep down there is still some bit of Anakin Skywalker, no matter how much he denies it. There's still a little sliver of good in him. And Luke knows that, that little bit is all he needs, and that pure optimism about it, and the faith in his father, and this love is ultimately what ends up saving him. But during that fight, despite the fact that Luke is very much trying to redeem Vader, he still falls prey to the dark side. He tries to keep himself controlled in a lot of ways, trying to avoid the fight with Vader as much as he can, because Vader is attacking him. But when Vader starts threatening Leia, Luke loses it. He gives in to those feelings of anger and hatred, and he gains power, and he overpowers Vader. And you can see he's just losing it. He's using the dark side. He's falling prey to all of those awful feelings. What the dark side thrives on. Anger, hatred, pain. All of those things. And overpowers Vader and cuts his hand off. But then he realizes, whoa. What am I doing? Especially when he sees Vader's hand and he sees it's robotic. And then Luke's like, I have a robotic hand. And all these parallels between Luke and Anakin. And all the stuff like with Empire Strikes Back when he's fighting Vader in the Dagobah swamp and he sees the mask come off and it's his face. And even if it wasn't intended at the time, all the way back in A New Hope when it said that, Luke has a lot of his father in him. You have a lot of these parallels between Luke and Anakin, and that Luke is realizing that he's falling prey to that dark side. He's falling prey to these awful things, and it gained him power, the power he needed to beat Vader, one of his goals, to stop him from doing bad things. But he realized that what he was doing, he would have just killed Vader, and it's what Palpatine wanted. He was trying to corrupt Luke in the same way that he corrupted Anakin. But then Luke realizes, and he pulls himself back, because if he continued on that same path, well, he would have just become like Vader. He would have been repeating all the mistakes his father made, because he may have wanted that power to protect Leia. Even if he wasn't thinking, I want to use the dark side for power, that's still kind of what happened. And it's that, in the throes of his anger, it's the, I won't let you hurt my sister. And he went after Vader. And, even Anakin, you can see the times when he does something that's bad, there is some sort of good reason for it. I mean, there's an episode of the Clone Wars with Satine, and the guys, that one bad guy is basically taunting Obi-Wan and Satine, so you have to kill me and save everyone, but can you take my life? And then Anakin just goes, stab, and then kills him, and he's like, what? It's like, at least stop the bad guy. Well, sure, he's doing some bad things, but for good reasons. Even things like killing Dooku. It's like, you can rationalize these things. You can rationalize why he killed Dooku in Revenge of the Sith. Because, well, Dooku was a bad guy. And I mean, even though he had repaid Dooku for cutting his arm off by cutting both of his hands off, it's like, killing him was a little far. But you could say, you could rationalize it. Oh, well, he was a bad guy. So killing him while he was defenseless was okay. But then, later on, he doesn't want to kill Sidious because, well, Sidious is promising to be this ability to help Padme, playing Anakin like a fiddle. And this is the whole thing that Yoda says, is that the dark side is seductive. And that power is great, and you can get a lot of power very quickly. You can gain so much power, all this awesome stuff with the lightning and force choking and, possibly all sorts of other dark abilities that are, awful, powerful, but awful. But it comes at that price. You give up who you are, your humanity. I mean, look at Palpatine and just all how messed up and nasty he looks. Sure, he probably is living longer than he normally would if he wasn't, feeding off of the Force, but look at what it's gotten him. He's a nasty, shriveled monster. Look at what Anakin ended up as. A nasty, scarred cyborg stuck in a suit that was the only thing sustaining his life. this doesn't come with, I mean, and shoot, even like look what happened with Dooku and Maul. Both of them were killed, and okay, ignoring stuff with Maul later on, but like they were, using in the dark side ended up getting them mutilated and killed. Like, this stuff is not pleasant. You put yourself on a dark path, and once you go on that dark path, it's hard to get off. Which is why Luke had to come up with a hard stop in the throwing his lightsaber and says, I am a Jedi like my father before me. It's not just a great statement about the positive way he views, Vader, and that, he believes that Vader can be saved, but also in his own declaration of, I am not going to fall to the dark side. I would rather die than fall to the dark side and serve you. Basically telling Palpatine to his face, you lost. You wanted me, you can't get me. And it's that stand that allows him to resist the dark side. So I know this sounds like a bit of a tangent, but you bring this all back to the concept of the Gray Jedi. To balance yourself with the light and the dark side, you can't do that. The dark side is corruptive. The dark side gets a hold of you. It feeds off of the negative. It gives you power that you want, power that you'll need. And this is why it's so seductive. You can get a lot of power very quickly. Luke, in the Return of the Jedi, gained so much power very quickly and just stomped Vader, basically. Just went after him like a madman. But it's not inherently superior. And it's funny, if you look at episode 1 in the big fight between Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon versus Darth Maul. There's a lot of great things about that. And one of the things is that after Qui-Gon is killed, Obi-Wan is furious. And he goes and he is attacking Maul with all that anger. And yeah, that's a bit of falling towards the dark side. Because it's so easy. It's so easy to get that power and be so angry. But then it's not until he learns to focus and control himself that he actually beats Maul. Because Maul's better at using the dark side than him. Obi-Wan's, not Luke. But he's not Anakin. So he can't gain that power that they had. So it's, it's not saying that the dark side is superior. Which some people do want to say, oh, well, the dark side's, awesome. Okay, well, yeah. You get power, but it corrupts you. It's not something that you can just balance. When a lot of people look at the dark and the light side, a lot of them think that, oh, well, the dark side is misunderstood. It's really not. Going back to the fight with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan and Darth Maul, when you see them, one of the great ways of seeing the differences between the light and the dark side is where you have, during that part where they're stuck with those force fields between them, you can see how each of them are reacting, but specifically between Qui-Gon and Darth Maul. Qui-Gon stops, he kneels down, and he meditates. He's calm, and he's the one with the Force. And then Darth Maul is sitting there like prowling just like an animal, ready to fight. And you can see that different ways that, this is a representative of the dark and the light side. The light side is balance. The light side is good and calmness. And then the dark side is that, that viciousness. You can't balance this. The idea of the Gray Jedi doesn't work. You can't balance these two sides. You can't be half good and half evil and somehow end up being pretty good. Well, because you still are half evil. But even then, if you try to do that, sooner or later the dark side will corrupt you. And this idea, this is a great idea to explore in a story of a Jedi thinking that he can control the dark side, but ultimately ends up becoming corrupted. And shoot, we don't even know everything about. You have people like Count Dooku, who used to be a Jedi, who ended up turning towards the dark side after what happened with Qui-Gon. Him dying. And I wouldn't doubt that that Count Dooku didn't want to be evil. But shoot, he still fell into that. Anakin desperately wanted to save Padme from what he assumed was, a sure death. And he turned to the dark side for that power. But ultimately, no matter how good of your intentions, or no matter how much you feel like you can control yourself, you're still going to fall to that. And this isn't even Star Wars related, but it's kind of similar. And I want to bring up Saren from Mass Effect, because one of the things with Saren is that he joined the Reapers thinking that he could use them to his benefit. He wanted to help people, to save them from what was surely complete and total annihilation. He thought that he could control them. He thought that he could control this, but didn't even realize that he has fallen under the indoctrination of the Reapers and had become evil. He's nothing more than a puppet for them. And despite any good intentions he may have had, and this is also happens with Benezia, where Benezia thinks that she can help Saren, but she too herself falls to the dark side, indoctrination. Kind of the similar functions in the story. But Benezia and Saren, despite any good intentions that they may have been able to control themselves, they still ended up becoming bad. They ended up falling towards being puppets of the Reapers through the indoctrination. And that's a similar thing with the dark side. You can't balance this. You can't have one foot in each side and go, I'm balanced, because that doesn't work. You may have good intentions. You may be very, very self-controlled. But if you actually are giving in to some of the dark side, even if you think that you can control it, it will sooner or later control you. This is a problem. This is why you have to avoid the dark side. This is why the old Jedi Order tried so desperately to avoid things that could lead to it. Wrong approach to an actual problem. It was an attempt at solving an issue, but it was the wrong solution. And obviously someone like Luke would have much more experience in dealing with that and could teach students that, yes, these are things you'll feel anger, you'll feel hatred, you'll feel these things. And it's not that you have to completely deny that these exist, but don't let it take you over. You have to be able to control yourself. You not give in to those things, or lest you fall to the dark side. And this is something that the movies show, and this is something that, in the line that is said, that Yoda says, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hatred, and hatred leads to suffering. It's like, sure, you may take one step, but if you're not controlling yourself, you will fall to the dark side. It's not, and it's shocking how easy that can be. So when you talk about the Gray Jedi balancing, you can't do that. You can't just get cool Sith powers without any repercussions. You can't use the dark side for all the benefits that it gives with none of the consequences. And you can't balance the light side and the dark side, because the light side is good. The light side isn't just represented by Jedi. There are different types of Force users. And, but the light side of the Force as a whole is good. Just because the Jedi made mistakes doesn't mean that the light side has some sort of inherent badness to it. That was the Jedi creating their own code. This can be fixed. Luke showed that you don't need to follow that to be a Jedi in Return of the Jedi. Luke can create a new Jedi Order that understands the flaws of the past and works to fix them by understanding the mistakes that Obi-Wan, that Yoda, that, Qui-Gon, any of them had made. He can learn from this and mold a new Jedi Order in a way that will avoid those problems, which is really what should have happened in the sequels, but that's a totally different discussion. But yeah, a lot of people want to have their, they don't like the Jedi. Well, you don't need to follow all the Jedi code exactly to be a Jedi. Being a Jedi is dictated by the code, and if you change the code, it's a different type of Jedi. You can still be a good guy and not be a celibate monk. I'm sure Luke didn't want to be a celibate monk. That's why in the EU he married Mara Jade. One of the few good things I like from the EU. But, you can't just balance good and evil and then go, yeah, I'm balanced. I'm a Gray Jedi. Because if you want to have a different, like, faction, you can't really call it Jedi. If there's someone who tries to balance the dark and the light side of the Force, you know, you could, if you want to create new factions, if you want to, you know, come up with own fanfiction factions or discuss different philosophies, then create new factions. Talk about this in fanfiction. Go hog wild with it. You know, I don't really care. But this idea of the Gray Jedi being, in some cases, people viewing them as superior because, oh well, they're both light and dark. It doesn't work. Because sooner or later, the dark side will get you. And that's why you have to resist it. That's why you have to be careful. And if you feel like you're falling to it like Luke, that's why they need to be careful. They need to pull back and they need to resist the dark side and not fall to it. Or else you're just going to become a Sith. Look at Anakin. So I think that's about it for this topic. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can comment below if you're on YouTube. If you're on Tumblr, send me an ask and do topic : then whatever topic you want me to talk about. Just make sure to follow the rules I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. So what are your thoughts on the whole Gray Jedi? Do you like it? Do you think it makes no sense? Please comment below. And thank you for watching.